It was October 14th, 1994, 5047 in the morning. Earl Maddox was standing at the edge of his eastern field, boots sinking slightly into soil that had been damp the night before, drinking coffee from a dented thermos he had used since 1981. The sky over Nickerson, Kansas was the color of pewter. The air smelled the way it always does in Reno County in mid-October, of dry grass and cold coming in from the north, and something faintly metallic that meant rain was 3 or 4 days out. He was checking his winter wheat. It had gone in on September 18th, right on schedule. The seedlings were at the flag leaf stage now, pale green threads rising from dark earth, close together, uniform. Earl would crouch every 20 feet along the field margin and press 2 fingers into the soil to test moisture depth. He had been doing this since he was 11 years old. He did it with the same 2 fingers, the index and the middle on his left hand, every time. The field was 240 acres. It stretched south along Pratt Road and east toward the dry creek bed that marked the boundary of Walt Gruber's property. Earl had farmed it since 1977. His father had farmed it before that. His grandfather had broken this ground in 1923 with a 4-horse team and an Oliver riding plow. And the county extension record still had a note from 1929 saying the Maddox place had some of the best managed dryland wheat in the county. Earl pulled his second boot free from the soft earth and took one more step toward the field. That was when he smelled it. Not rain, not the usual morning smell. Smoke. Earl Maddox was 61 years old that October, though most people who didn't know him assumed he was older. He had the hands of a man who had worked outside every day of his life, thick through the palm, dry at the knuckles, with a scar across the right thumb from a bailing accident in 1969. He stood 5 feet 10 inches. He walked slowly and without wasted motion. He had never been the kind of farmer who talked much at the grain elevator or at Merle's Diner on Main Street. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was usually about the land. What most people in Nickerson didn't know about Earl Maddox was that he had spent 3 winters in the late 1960s studying at Kansas State University in Manhattan, not farming, soil science. He had taken 19 credit hours before his father's health pulled him back to the farm permanently in 1970. He had never finished the degree, but he had read every soil science textbook he could find for the next 25 years, ordering them through interlibrary loan from the Reno County Public Library and from the Extension Office on Blanchard Street. He had learned almost everything else from his father. Harold Maddox had died of a heart attack on July 3, 1979, at the age of 68, in the machine shed, while changing the oil in the 1966 John Deere 4020. Earl had found him there. Harold had been a quiet man, too. Quieter than Earl, if that was possible, and he had farmed 480 acres without a single bank loan from 1948 until the day he died. What Harold had left Earl was not money. It was a way of seeing. Harold had grown up farming during the Dust Bowl. He had watched the soil blow away in 1934 and 1935. He had watched neighbors abandon their land and drive west. But Harold's own father, Earl's grandfather Chester, had done something the other farmers hadn't. When a section of their north field burned in a grass fire in the summer of 1936, Chester hadn't plowed it under and started over. He had worked the ash into the soil with a disc harrow and planted rye. By 1938, that section was producing better than the ground that hadn't burned. Harold had told Earl about it once, not as a lesson, just as a fact, the way he told facts over supper, without looking up from his plate. "Fire doesn't kill good ground," Harold had said. "It feeds it. You just have to let it feed slow." Earl had been 19 that year. He had filed it away in the part of his mind where he kept things he didn't fully understand yet. He would not understand it fully for another 38 years. By the time Earl reached the center of the road, the orange light was already visible above the tree line to the south. It was not a small fire. He drove his 1987 Ford F-250 down Pratt Road and found his wheat field burning along its entire eastern boundary, a line of flame running nearly half a mile from the creek bed northward, pushed by a steady wind out of the southeast. The seedlings were gone where the fire had passed. The soil was black and smoking. In a few places the fire was still moving slowly westward through the dry stubble. He called the Reno County Sheriff's Office from a payphone at the Sinclair station on Route 96. It took investigators 4 days to establish what 2 neighboring farmhands had already seen. Walt Gruber's hired man, a 23-year-old from Hutchinson named Terry Blokel, had been seen near the creek bed after midnight on October 13th with a fuel can. Walt Gruber had been in a property line dispute with Earl Maddox since 1991. Gruber claimed that a drainage easement along the creek gave him rights to farm a 6-foot strip that Earl had always considered his own. The dispute had never been resolved. Both men had attorneys. By November, the Reno County District Attorney had filed arson charges against both Terry Blokel and Walt Gruber. Gruber's attorney entered a plea of not guilty. The case would take 2 years. The burned field was 240 acres. The county extension agent, a 31-year-old named Kevin Reese, drove out and walked the site in the second week of October. He spent about 20 minutes walking, then wrote his assessment in a manila folder he kept in his truck. He found Earl sitting on the tailgate of the F-250 and handed him a copy. "Wheat crop is a total loss," Reese said. "Soil's compacted from the heat. pH is probably off. You'll want to re-till in the ply lime and replant. Give it a year." Earl read the assessment. He folded it once and put it in his breast pocket. "I'll think on it," he said. 3 days later, Gerald Prentice came out. Prentice was the regional director of Consolidated Grain Partners, LLC, a corporate farming operation out of Wichita that had been quietly buying up distressed farmland in Reno County for 4 years. He was 48, drove a new Chevrolet Suburban, and wore a barn coat that had clearly never been worn in a barn. He stood at the edge of the burned field with Earl and looked out over 240 acres of black ground. "I'll give you $200 an acre," Prentice said. "That's $48,000 for land that isn't going to produce for at least 2 years, probably 3. Earl looked at the field. "No," he said. Prentice waited, as if expecting more. "It's going to take significant investment to rehabilitate this soil," Prentice said. He said it the way a doctor tells a patient they have a bad prognosis. Not unkind, just certain. The heat at that kind of fire temperature, we're talking about sterilized topsoil, destroyed microbial activity. The organic matter is gone. You'd be farming dead ground. Earl looked at him. "I know what a fire does," Earl said. Prentice drove away. Earl stood at the field edge for another 40 minutes, alone, watching the wind move ash across the black surface in thin gray veils, wet low heat. He was thinking about his father. Earl spent the winter of 1994 in his study, a 10-by-12 room off the kitchen with 3 mismatched bookshelves and a desk lamp from 1962. He had always done his winter reading there. Ruth, his wife of 34 years, brought coffee at 9 in the evening without being asked. She did not ask him what he was planning. She already understood the general shape of it. He started with his K-State soil science textbooks, the ones with his own pencil notes in the margins from 1967 and 1968. Then he ordered 3 government publications from the USDA through the library. Agricultural Research Service Bulletin 34B, published 1951, on post-fire soil chemistry in the southern Great Plains. A Kansas Agricultural Experiment Station report from 1948 on wood ash as a soil amendment, and a bound copy of a 1939 paper from the Dust Bowl-era Soil Conservation Service on alkaline amendment strategies in compacted clay loam profiles. In January of 1995, he drove 188 miles to Manhattan to see a man named Dr. Raymond Cutler. Cutler was 73 years old and had retired from the Kansas State Agronomy Department in 1989 after 31 years. He still came to his former office 3 mornings a week to read journals. He was tall and thin with hearing aids in both ears and a habit of looking at the ceiling when he was thinking. Earl sat across the desk from him and described the burned field in detail, the soil type, the fire duration, the depth of heat penetration based on the look of the ash layer, the prevailing pH of the field before the fire. Cutler listened without interrupting. "How much ash is on the surface?" he finally said. "Average about half an inch." Earl said, "Heavier along the east margin." Cutler looked at the ceiling. "Don't plow it under yet," he said. "Don't lime it. Don't do anything with it yet." He explained it slowly, the way he had explained things to students for 30 years. The ash on the surface, wood ash, crop residue ash, was alkaline, high in potassium and calcium, and in certain concentrations would shift the soil pH upward, which, in an already moderately acidic clay loam like Earl's field, could actually move the pH toward neutral, toward ideal. The heat from the fire had not sterilized the soil, not at the depth of a grass fire moving across a field. What it had done was clear the surface competition, expose the mineral soil, and deposit a thin layer of raw mineral amendment. Modern thinking would tell you to lime this and re-till, Cutler said. Modern thinking would be wrong. You got free amendment sitting on top of 240 acres. He leaned forward. Work it in shallow, ½ inch to an inch. Let it rest through the winter. Don't rush it. Earl thanked him, shook his hand, and drove back to Nickerson. He told no one what he planned except Ruth, and even to her he said it in 3 sentences over supper, then ate the rest of his meal without speaking. The work started on March 4th, 1995. After the last hard frost, Earl used his 1961 Oliver 505 chisel plow, a 3-point hitch implement he had bought second-hand in 1974 and rebuilt twice. The chisel plow ran at 3 to 4 inches of depth, which was shallow enough to incorporate the ash layer without burying it below the zone where it would matter. He drove it in parallel passes across the 240 acres. It took 11 days. He ran it alone from 6 in the morning until the light failed. Dale farmed 380 acres 2 miles north on Pratt Road. He had known Earl for 40 years. Dale farmed 380 acres 2 miles north on Pratt Road. He had known Earl for 40 years. He stood at the field margin and watched the Oliver work through the black surface, turning the ash into the soil in thin, dark ribbons. "What the hell are you doing, Earl?" he said. Earl stopped the tractor. He climbed down. "Working the ash in," Earl said. Dale looked at the field. He looked at the chisel plow. He looked at the field. He looked at the chisel plow. He was a careful man who had never lost a crop he didn't explain afterward with mathematics. He shook his head. "You're farming a grave," he said. Earl looked at him. "Maybe," Earl said. He climbed back on the tractor. In April of 1995, Earl planted winter rye across the full 240 acres. Not wheat, rye. The variety was Elbin, a cover crop cultivar known for its deep rooting and organic matter contribution. It was not a cash crop. It would generate no income. It would grow through the spring, be terminated in June, and its root mass and surface residue would be incorporated into the soil in preparation for planting Austrian winter peas in August, the second phase of what Earl had calculated would be a 2-year soil recovery sequence before he attempted wheat again. He had done the math on a yellow legal pad. It took 3 pages. The legal situation moved on its own schedule. In March of 1996, Walt Gruber pleaded no contest to 1 count of criminal facilitation of arson. Terry Blokel pleaded guilty to arson in the 2nd degree. The civil judgment came down in August of 1996. Gruber was ordered to pay Earl Maddox $47,200 in damages, the assessed value of the lost wheat crop plus legal fees. Earl put $31,000 of it toward operating expenses and the rest toward seed and soil testing. The soil tests were the first good sign. Earl had sent baseline samples to the K-State Extension Soil Testing Laboratory in November of 1994 before any work had been done. pH had measured 4.9 acidic, borderline poor for winter wheat. Organic matter was 0.8%, which was low for this soil type. Potassium was below adequate. Potassium was below adequate. He pulled a second set of samples in October of 1995, after the rye cover crop had been incorporated. pH 5.8, organic matter 12%. He looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he folded the lab report and put it in the same breast pocket where he had put Gerald Prentice's offer 2 years before. He did not say anything about it. He went back to work. The Elben rye the following spring. Planted September 1995, terminated June 1996, added another layer. The root channels it left in the soil were visible when Earl walked the field in July with a soil probe, fine branching networks of decomposed organic matter penetrating 12 to 15 inches into the clay loam profile. Water infiltration had changed. Earl could see it after a rain. Water that used to pond along the eastern margin now moved through the surface within an hour. In August of 1996, he planted Austrian winter peas. By October, the nodules on the root systems were visible, small pink nitrogen-fixing clusters attached to every root branch. He pulled up plants and showed them to no one. He noted the nodule count in his yellow legal pad, average 14 per root system, approximately 32% of roots bearing active nodules. He had not used a synthetic nitrogen application on this field since he began the restoration. He would not need to. The winter of 1996 was cold and dry in Reno County. The pea cover crop winter killed in February. Earl incorporated the residue in April of 1997 with the chisel plow. He sent a third round of soil samples that same month. pH 6.8. Organic matter 3.1%. Potassium high adequate. He sat with the lab report in his study for an hour. Ruth came in with coffee. He handed her the paper without explanation. She looked at it. She set it back on the desk. "You going to put wheat in?" she said it. "September," he said. The wheat went in on September 22, 1997. The variety was Jagger, a hard red winter wheat released by K-State 2 years earlier, bred for yield and resistance in southern Great Plains conditions. Earl seeded it at 1.1 million seeds per acre, slightly above the standard recommendation for his soil type. He watched it emerge. He checked it through November and December, crouching every 20 feet along the field margin with his left hand, the same 2 fingers he had used since he was 11. The stand was even. The color was deep green, not the pale color of plants stretching for nutrients. In January of 1998, a graduate student from the K-State Agronomy Department named Melissa Hoff drove down from Manhattan with her faculty advisor, Dr. Stephen Carr, to pull mid-season tissue samples for a routine county survey. They walked Earl's field for 2 hours. They did not know the history of the field. They were there because the county extension office had flagged the Maddox operation as part of a standard sampling rotation. Hoff sent Earl a copy of her field notes 3 weeks later, attached to a brief letter. She had written one sentence in the margin. "Tissue nitrogen levels in this stand are unusually high for a non-fertilized field. Do you know why?" Earl wrote back, "I think so." Harvest came in July of 1992 John Deere 66 combine across the 240 acres over 4 days. The yield monitor, a 19.4 Ag Leader unit he had retrofitted to the machine, showed a consistent 51 to 53 bushels per acre across the entire field, with the best numbers coming from the eastern sections, which had burned worst 4 years earlier. The final average, 52.3 bushels per acre. The county average that year, as published by the Reno County Extension Office in its August report, was 38 bushels per acre. Earl sat in the combine cab at the end of the last pass and shut the engine off. He sat in the quiet for a few minutes. The field was clean cut down to stubble. The late afternoon light was coming in from the west, and the cut straw was gold-colored in it. He drove home. Ruth was at the kitchen table. 52 bushels, he said. She looked up from what she was reading. "Good," she said. He poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. Word didn't travel fast in Nickerson. It never had. It moved the way it always moved in a small agricultural county, through the grain elevator, through the co-op, through the parking lot of the extension office on Blanchard Street. By September of 1998, people who had heard vague versions of what Earl had done on the Pratt Road field were asking the county extension office if it was true. Kevin Reese, the same extension agent who had assessed the field as a probable total loss in 1994, drove out himself that fall. He walked the field for an hour. He pulled up a handful of stubble and examined the root residue. He dug a soil probe down 8 inches in 3 locations and examined the profile. He found Earl in the machine shed. "I told you the soil was dead," Reese said. Earl didn't say anything. "I was wrong," Reese said. Earl nodded. He showed Reese the soil test results from 1994 through 1998. He showed him the lab reports from K-State, the legal pad pages with the seeding calculations, the tissue nitrogen notes from Melissa Hoff. He walked Reese through every decision and every season. Reese took notes for 45 minutes. The county extension office submitted an inquiry to the K-State Department of Agronomy in October of 1998, requesting a formal evaluation of the Maddox field as a case study in post-fire soil recovery using ash incorporation mitigaction nitrogen fixation. Dr. Stephen Carr accepted. Melissa Hoff completed her master's thesis on the subject in May of 2000. The study was published in the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation in the spring of 2001, under the title Biological Soil Restoration Following Grassland to Cropland Fire Damage in the Southern Great Plains, a case study in Reno County, Kansas. Earl's name was in the acknowledgments. He was described as cooperating farmer. He read the paper once, noted 2 minor errors in the ash incorporation timing, and put it in a manila folder in his file cabinet. Dale Coupon came by in November of 1998. He walked the harvested field without speaking for a long time. Then he bent down and picked up a handful of soil from the surface. He let it crumble through his fingers. The color was darker than it had been in 1994, darker than the fields on either side of Pratt Road. "You didn't lie tied." It was not quite a question. "No," Earl said. Dale stood there with the black soil on his fingertips. "I've been farming this county since 1963, he said. "I didn't know that was possible." Earl looked at the field. "My grandfather knew," he said. Gerald Prentice arrived on a Thursday afternoon in April of 1999. He did not call ahead. Earl's truck was in the drive, which was apparently indication enough. Prentice knocked on the back door, which was the door that meant business in Reno County, and Ruth showed him into the kitchen. He sat down across the table from Earl. He was wearing the same kind of barn coat. He looked like a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was now trying to remember it. "I made you an offer in 1994, Prentice said. "I told you the soil was dead." Earl waited. "I was wrong," Prentice said. "Not wrong about the offer, wrong about the science. I was repeating what the agronomist in our Wichita office told me. He was working from general principles. He had never actually seen what you did." He put both hands flat on the table. "I owe you an apology, and I'm giving it to you without qualifications." Earl looked at him. "All right," Earl said. Then Prentice said what he had actually come to say. Consolidated Grain Partners had acquired 1,800 acres in Reno and Harvey counties over the past 6 years. 800 of those acres were showing consistent pH problems, acidic soils, low organic matter, declining yields. Their agronomist had been recommending limestone applications at $60 to $80 per acre per application, with diminishing returns each cycle. The Wichita office had spent $61,000 on soil amendment in the past 3 years on those fields. Yields were still below county average. "We heard about your results," Prentice said. "The K-State paper. The yield numbers." He paused. "I'd like to know what you did." Everything, from the beginning. Earl got up and went to the file cabinet in his study. He came back with the manila folder. He set it on the table and opened it. He walked Prentice through the soil test sequence, the reasoning behind the shallow incorporation, the cover crop rotation, the nitrogen fixation math. He explained what Dr. Cover rotation, the nitrogen fixation math. He explained what Dr. J. Cutler had told him in 1995 and why it had confirmed what his father had told him 30 years before that. He answered every question Prentice asked, and Prentice asked good questions, better questions than Earl had expected. It took 2 hours. When Prentice finally stood to leave, he paused at the back door. "You could have sold me that field," Prentice said. "You could have taken the 48,000 and walked away." Earl looked at him. "I know," he said. Prentice looked like he was about to say something else. Then he nodded once and left. That night, after Ruth had gone to bed, Earl sat in the study for an hour. The manila folder was still on the kitchen table. He thought about his father. He thought about Chester Maddox breaking this ground with 4 horses in 1923. He thought about the 1936 fire that had burned the Northfield and fed it better than any amendment Chester had ever applied. He thought about how long it takes for a thing to become true enough to tell someone. By 2003, 14 farms in Reno County had applied some version of the ash incorporation and biological nitrogen approach that Earl had used on the Pratt Road field. Not all of them had a fire to work with. 3 of them had deliberately burned sections of old fallow ground under controlled conditions, a practice that the County Extension Office now officially described in its soil management guidance as Prescribed Burn Amendment, citing the 2001 K-State study. The Reno County Agricultural Extension Office added a new section to its annual soil management workshop in 2001, the year the journal paper was published. The section was titled Post-Disturbance Soil Recovery. Kevin Rees presented it himself. He attributed the methodology to cooperating farmer Earl Maddox of Nickerson by name in the opening slide. Consolidated Grain Partners applied a modified version of the process to 340 of its 800 problem acres beginning in the spring of 2000. By 2003, the company reported an average yield improvement of 11 bushels per acre across those fields, and a reduction in limestone application costs of 41%. Gerald Prentice presented the results at a Kansas Grain and Feed Association meeting in Wichita in November of 2003. He included a slide showing the original Pratt Road soil test data, pH 4.9 in 1994 to 6.8 in 1997. He told the story of the arson, the burned field, and the offer he had made. He told it honestly, including his own assessment in 1994 that the soil was dead. He did not soften it. "I told a farmer his ground piss said to the room. He told me he'd think about it. Then he went home and spent 4 years proving that I didn't know what I was talking about." He paused. "What I learned, what all of us should learn from this, is that there are people in this state who carry knowledge that doesn't show up in our agronomists' manuals, and when they tell us they know something, we should have the sense to listen." A transcript of the remarks was reprinted in the Kansas Farmer Trade publication that January. Earl did not attend the Wichita meeting. He read the transcript when Dale Koopman brought it over. He read it at the kitchen table. He put it down. "That's about right," he said. Dale looked at him. "Doesn't it bother you at all?" Dale said. "That he's up there in Wichita telling your story?" Earl thought about it. "He's telling it straight," he said. "That's what matters. It is October 2004. The wheat on the Pratt Road field went in 3 weeks ago. The same Jagger variety, same seeding rate, same 2 fingers pressed into the earth every 20 feet along the margin. The seedlings are just visible, a thin green haze rising from 240 acres of dark ground. The soil is darker than it was in 1993, before the fire. It is darker even than it was at the first harvest in 1998. The organic matter is at 3.4%. Earl checks it. ECV. He notes the number on a fresh page of the yellow legal pad. The Oliver 505 chisel plow is in the machine shed, hanging on its storage hooks. Earl rebuilt it for the third time last winter, replaced the shanks and the wear points, adjusted the coulters. He does this the way his father taught him to, with the part in his hand and the light coming in through the shed window from the east. No hurry. Each part in order. The legal dispute with Walt Gruber has been settled for 8 years. Gruber sold his operation in 2001 and moved to Hutchinson. The land east of the creek was purchased by a young couple from Hutchinson named Harlan and Denise Polk. They came over in the spring of 2002, introduced themselves, and asked Earl if he would be willing to walk their fields. He walked them for 2 hours and told them what he saw. He has done it 3 times since. Ruth comes out with coffee just after 7 in the morning. She hands him the thermos, the same dented one he's had since 1981, and looks out at the field. "Going to be a cold winter," she says. "Probably," he says. She goes back inside. Earl stands at the field margin with the thermos in both hands. The sun is not up yet. The light is gray and flat across the plains, the kind of early morning light that shows you the land as it really is, without the softening that comes later in the day. He can see the seedling rows from here. They are straight, they are healthy, they are just beginning. He thinks about what his father said all those years ago. Fire doesn't kill good ground. He has spent a long time understanding what that really means. Not just that ash is alkaline, not just that hash is alkaline, not just that heat clears the surface competition. His father had meant something larger than the chemistry. The ground that has burned and been tended and rested and turned at the right depth and planted at the right time. That ground remembers what it went through. It carries it. That darkness in the soil is not damage. It is memory. It is every fire and every winter and every root that ever worked its way through this particular piece of earth. You don't fix the ground that has burned. You finish what the fire started. Earl unscrews the thermos cap and drinks his coffee. The wheat field stretches out in front of him, still and quiet in the gray morning, ready, as it has always been, for whatever comes next.